Hi all, this video aims at helping you knowing how to read words in European Portuguese. Note that Brazilian Portuguese follows slightly different rules. The general rule to reading words in Portuguese is the vowel in the stressed syllable is open and all the others are shut. Of course, there are exceptions, but if you get the general rule right, you'll worry about the exceptions later. Here are a few examples. Casa, which means house. The stressed syllable is in ca, so the first A is open and the other one is shut. Casa. Cortina, which is Portuguese for curtain. The stressed syllable is in P, so both O and A are shut. Cortina. The trick here is knowing which is the stressed syllable. At first, it may seem hard, but once you get the gist of it, you won't even think about it. It will just come out naturally. However, there are a few things you must know beforehand in order to get this right. These are knowing how the vowels may sound, special characters and specific rules, diphthongs, and how to identify the stressed syllable. Unlike English, vowels in Portuguese do not vary in length. However, they do vary in openness. Like French, Portuguese is also a very nasal language. This means that every vowel has its nasal version. The names of the vowels in Portuguese are their short version in English: a, e, I, o, u. English long vowels for Portuguese native speakers are regarded as two different sounds, and indeed most of them are diphthongs in Portuguese. Vowel I. Starting from the easiest one, nasal vowel I sounds in. Other than that, it always sounds E. Given that Portuguese is a stress-time language, as is English, it may happen that this vowel sound is faded or even suppressed. For example, minister in Portuguese is ministro, but speaking fast, it will sound ministro. For example, chita, which means cheetah, or cálice, which means chalice or cup. Vowel U. Vowel U is also easy. Its nasal sound is and other than that, it is u. However, as it is with English too, there are some situations in which this vowel is not pronounced, like the word God in English. For example, urso, which is a bear, buraco, which is a hole, único, which means unique. Vowel A. Vowel A is not too hard. Nasal A sounds open A sounds a, and shut A sounds A at the end of words in Portuguese sounds unless there is an accent that modifies its sound. For example, America in Portuguese sounds América. Both A's are shut, just like in English. Lã, which means wool, has a nasal A. Lágrima, which means tear. The first A is open, I is always E, and the second A is shut. Vowel O. Nasal O sounds on. This one has another level than A. Open O sounds O, and then if you close your lips a little, it will sound O, and then a little more, and it will sound U. O at the end of words in Portuguese sounds the same as the English words to or do, again, unless there is an accent. For example, the first O in Ontario is nasal and the other one is shut. Cola, which means glue, has an open O. Cor, which means color, has a mid-open O. Ronaldo in Portuguese sounds Ronaldo. The stressed syllable is in nal and both O's are shut. Vowel E. Vowel E is the trickiest one because it has the greatest amplitude of sounds in Portuguese. Nasal E sounds E, open E sounds E, then as you close your lips it will sound E, I, U, and mute. E at the end of words in Portuguese tends to be mute as the E in mute, unless there is an accent. For example, engenheiro, which means engineer, starts with a nasal E. Note that while the sounds are similar in both Portuguese and English, in English it sounds N and in Portuguese it sounds E. Another example is elétrico, which means electrical. The word sounds pretty much the same as in English in regards to the vowel E. Pergunta, which means question. The E in this word sounds E. Think of it as the I in the word engineer, which is not really pronounced. Or as per Cambridge Dictionary,
engineer, engineer.
Diphthongs. To keep it simple, diphthongs are combinations of vowels that are read in one go in a word. This is important because diphthongs take precedence over the general rule. Some examples include I, au, ei, eu, el, ui, oi, ou, wa, ui, uo, ão, em, oin. For example, pai, automático, lei, meu, chapéu, boi, constrói, outro, quatro, cuidadoso, mão, mãe, compõe. The word automático is a good example of why knowing about diphthongs is important. The stressed syllable is in ma, however, the first syllable is a diphthong, and so it sounds ow. What is the stressed syllable? The stressed syllable is the one that carries the most intonation in your voice. For example, violin. Words in Portuguese are only stressed in one of the three last syllables. Whenever the word has them, accents determine which is the stressed syllable. Rather than awkward, they are your friends. Accents in Portuguese may be grave, A, E, I, O, U, agudo, A, circunflexo, A, E, O, til, on. Portuguese words can only have one accent, or two at most, and only if one of them is a tilde. In this case, the tilde loses priority, and the other accent tells which is the stressed syllable. For example, benção, which means blessing, or Cristóvão, which is Portuguese for Christopher. Naturally, not every word has accents, and here's where it gets tricky. The stressed syllable in words that do not have an accent will either be the last one or the second from the end. The stressed syllable is the last one. If the word ends in ar, for example, andar, which means to walk, el, for example, Portugal, the stressed syllable is in gal. Is, for example, barris, which means barrels, the stress is in ris. Iz, which has the same sound as is, for example, perdiz, which means partridge, the stressed syllable is in dish. For example, atum, which means tuna. The stressed syllable is in tum. I am, for example, anakin, which means mako. The stressed syllable is in kin. And finally, any diphthong. For example, cantai, Macau, cantei, viveu, corrói, e levou, instrui. Otherwise, it is the second from the end. Let's look at a few examples. O rato roeu a rolha da garrafa de rum do rei da Rússia. This is a tongue twister which translates into the mouse gnawed the cork of the bottle of rum of the king of Russia. A single O sounds U, as in put. Rato. This is a two-syllable word, and it follows the general rule, so the stressed syllable is in ra. The A is open and the O is shut. Ra, tu. Ruel. Again, a two-syllable word with no accents. This one, however, ends in a diphthong, so the stressed syllable is the last one. The O is shut and the diphthong sounds eu. Ruel. A single A sounds the same as English, as in a tree or Maria. Folha. Another two-syllable word with no accent. This one is a sort of an exception because the O is not fully open, and that's because it ends in lhe. Nevertheless, it follows the general rule with regards to the stressed syllable. Rolha. De. Again, vowel A at the end of words sounds like the A in Maria unless there is an accent on it. Garrafa. This is a three-syllable word that follows the general rule, so the first and last A's are shut, while the second one is open. Garrafa. De. Vowel E at the end of words tends to sound E or mute unless there is an accent. Rum. Here we have a vowel U followed by an M in the same syllable, while the M ends the syllable, making the U sound nasal. Rum. Do. Vowel O at the end of words sounds exactly the same as the O in the English word do. Say. A is a diphthong and it sounds like English vowel A. Rússia. This is a three-syllable word with an accent on vowel U, indicating that that is the stressed syllable. Vowels U and I always sound the same, and vowel A is shut. Rusia. You might be thinking what's the point of having an accent on vowel U if the sound does not change? The reason is to set the stressed syllable, and without it the word would sound Rusia. If you like this content, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe.